Well, good afternoon and welcome to the New Haven Museum's lunchtime webinar. My name is Cynthia Riccio and I am the Director of Programs and Planning for the museum. Have you ever researched your family history but didn't know how to preserve all that you found? Are you curious about how your family history connects to the larger history of the United States but unsure how to begin your exploration? Today, we are so happy to have Kayla Keaton, former New Haven Museum intern and 2025 Yale University graduate, here to offer a look at the research and creative process needed to make a family history book. Keaton notes that a family history book is a great way to preserve the memory of the elders in one's family and keep their stories for future generations. Today's webinar will offer a starting place to begin a family history book journey. In a time where educational institutions are increasingly under scrutiny, public schools and museums alike, we can find solace in being able to research your direct ancestors to learn about historical subjects that are important to us, Keaton says. Baobab, A Tree of Our Lives, is Keaton's own family history book, tracing her maternal and paternal family histories. Inspired by her own curiosity around her family's history and how to preserve their stories, Baobab is a loving combination of genealogy, archiving, oral history, scholarship, art, and creative design that preserves Keaton's research findings into the form of a book/magazine. I realize the wealth of knowledge my family members have cannot be taken for granted, Keaton says. I wanted to act on this project while my elders were still able to tell their stories and share information that I did not know. Keaton is a 2025 graduate of Yale University with a degree in African American Studies and intensive certificate in Education Studies. A North Carolina native, she found her passion for history, preservation, and educational equity during a high school partnership with the Equal Justice Initiative, investigating the only recorded lynching in her home county. While a student at Yale, she learned from New Haven educators by participating in teacher partnerships, working in high school in the community, and interning for the New Haven Museum. Welcome, Kayla.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining me for this lunch webinar. And first of all, thank you so much to the New Haven Museum and Cynthia for inviting me to talk today. My name is Kayla Keaton, and I am so excited to share with you all my passion project and how you can make one yourself as well. So to give you a roadmap, I'm going to talk a little bit more about my journey to family history, how I came to develop this framework, what a family history book is, and the majority of our time together we'll be talking about the entire process from start to finish at a bird's eye view. And then finally, I'll share Baobab for you all to view on your computers or on your phones, and then I'll try my best to save as much time as possible for questions. So this was mentioned a little bit in my bio, but my name is Kayla, but my real name is Catherine Lillian. I am very proudly named after both of my grandmothers, my maternal and paternal. I'm a North Carolina native, so I am a Southern transplant up here in New Haven. And because of this project, I was able to dive really deep into my Black American and Caribbean ancestry in ways that I never had before. I just graduated from Yale this past May, and I focused on African American history as well as education. And that was because I firmly believe that history is the future, that we cannot understand where we are going if we don't also know who we were and where we have been. And that's how I came to the topic of family history, because I believe that my family and our ancestors, they witnessed the history that I learned in a textbook in school. How much cooler would it be if I had their living testimony in addition to the facts that make my family as unique as it is today? So, a brief overview of my family's background and family history and why I was particularly drawn to this. I'm not the first person in my family to create a historical record. It actually goes all the way back to 1976 with Alex Haley and his iconic text Roots. Next year will be 50 years of the book, and then in 2027 will be 50 years of the television series that we all know and love about Kunta Kinte and his descendants. Roots was incredibly important, particularly for African Americans, because Haley showed two important things. First is that African Americans have a history, and number two, that we can research it and track it. And my family was part of this post-Roots genealogy boom that led to the first Leith family reunion and souvenir journal in 1989. Now, this was way before I was even a thought in my parents' mind. And so I'm building on this tradition that my family members started in 1989, where they were already creating these physical documents of research that I was able to inherit. So I was born in 2000. By that time, they had at least two journals already produced. And so when I was in the sixth grade, that was my first brush with family history as a school assignment. And for a sixth grader, it was a pretty great job, I would guess. But when I came across that assignment a couple of years ago, I read it and I was like, this tells me next to nothing about my family history. It was really a glorified pedigree chart in paragraph form. I quite literally had a sentence that read, Caroline gave birth to Lewis, who then had George, who then had George Jr., who then had my mom, who then had me. And I'm not being funny when I say that. I literally wrote that paragraph. I had a lot more questions that I asked when I was 12 years old, rightfully so. I wanted to learn more about my ancestor who was born as a Black woman in 1828. What was that context? Because I did not at all mention the history of slavery in Eastern North Carolina. I didn't at all look into the history of New Bern, North Carolina, post-Emancipation Proclamation for my ancestors. I didn't even mention that my own grandfather served in the Air Force in that entire text, and that was a major part of his life. And so, as a 20-something-year-old, no longer a 12-year-old, I had more questions. I wanted to breathe life into my family history that I didn't do when I was 12, and also contribute to the record, extend the record that my family already began all the way in 1989. This is about 40 years later after they did that work. There were names and stories that were not part of the record yet, so I wanted to add to that tradition. But not everyone has a senior research project where they are able to research their family history like I did this past year. You may have a more personal reason or realizations that you're now coming to. So it was also a very personal project for me. For example, this beautiful lady here is my grandmother, Catherine, for whom I'm named after. I thought I knew a lot about her. Although she passed before I was born, I knew her through several pictures and through stories from my mom and her sisters. But when I came across this photograph, I actually couldn't recognize her at all. And I realized maybe I didn't know grandmother Catherine as well as I thought I did, despite never meeting her when she was alive. This man right here is my uncle Viviani. He is one of the two last remaining siblings related to my paternal grandmother Lillian. I knew nothing about him at all before this project. In fact, this project was the first time I had a conversation with Uncle Viviani, because I have not seen him since I was maybe 3 or 4 years old. So this was also my opportunity to form a new connection, to learn about family that I haven't been able to see that often. And finally, this lady right here is my Aunt Diane. Now, I've known her my entire life. She's not at all a mystery to me, but I knew her from the lens of her young niece who's just now graduated college. There are certain conversations and topics that she wouldn't talk to with a 5-year-old or a 12-year-old or even an 18-year-old. So this was a project that allowed me to know her as an adult with more mature questions, ready for more mature answers, and add another dimension to our relationship as aunt and niece. So whatever hole you fall into as to why you want to discover your family and their stories, I highly recommend making a family history book. So, what is a family history book? The official definition is that family history books are collaborative works of genealogical, archival, and historical research existing at the intersection of education, family history, memory, and archival preservation. The big three terms, though, are family history, American history, and creative design. Not only are you saving your family stories and all the information related to you all as individuals, but you're using that data as an entry point to learn about this country as a whole, to kind of recreate a library through the unique lens of you and your family. And the final part is that the way you present it, I hope, is fun and creative and unique and artistic in all of the ways that make sense for you. What can go in a family history book? It is quite literally anything and everything that you can think to put in a paper format. For me and my family history book, which I have printed right here, mine is about 80 pages of pictures, documents, heirlooms, history lessons, essays, and articles. I have oral history QR codes. There's poetry in there. There's a timeline in there, fun facts, recipes, art and music, maps and diagrams, biographies on my family members, memories, personalities, and of course, love. My family history book is unique because throughout every single page, every detail resonates with my family and what I have learned throughout the last year. And your family history book will look drastically different than mine. I think that's the beauty of this framework. So, how do you get from you're sitting in a webinar wanting to embark on this journey to holding a family history book in your hands? To me, it was 5 steps: research, organize, write, design, and give. Research is the bedrock. You can't do anything if you do not have the research, or at least a good grasp on the research. I found that even when I was on step 4 in creative design, I was still learning new details and information. But I couldn't get there without having at least something to work with at first. And there are 2 types of research that you have to do for a family history book. First is the genealogical research, then your historical research, which draws from the data you've pulled on your family. Now, I am an amateur genealogist at best. There are so many online resources and books out there that can go deeper into the genealogical research process. But for me and my experience, this was collecting as much data as possible from databases and records. That's names, dates, marriages, military property, death, and immigration records, noting significant locations, and confirming my family tree and the relationships everyone had with each other. The only thing I don't have up here is because it was not part of my journey, but you may have taken a DNA test, and that may also help you a lot with pulling pieces together. What I learned about genealogy is that everything all of a sudden can become a source. It wasn't just an online thing. I went to libraries and museums. I looked for cemetery records. I referenced my historical societies. My attic, garage, and closet were gold mines of information. And most importantly, for me, I conducted 7 oral histories with members of my family. You can create a family history book without oral histories. But for me, the benefit of having oral histories was, one, I was able to record my family members and have that recording for as long as I want to. Number 2, they breathed life into the paper trail. There's a difference between reading a census and seeing that, oh, your grandmother was 22 years old in 1930 and was living in New York, to hearing your grandmother talk about what 1930 New York was like for her as a young woman. So they work hand in hand, and oftentimes the oral history can confirm your paper data, or you can discover that documents may not always be absolutely correct. Names can be misspelled, ages can be written down differently or incorrectly. You learn these little details by having both with you. Now, again, I'm not an expert, but I did learn a few things along the way that when I was recording my interviews, I needed to have multiple devices on hand in case one messed up, my computer died, I would always have a backup. To download every single document or request for a scan of every single document so that you don't have to keep going and researching the same information on any database you're working with. You can just make a folder and always have it with you. Obituaries were my number one source. Finding funeral programs, particularly in my attic and my garage, it was already the life story of individuals, particularly those I had not met in my life. So if you're able to find obituaries or funeral programs, those will often be the best source for you. I built a literal pedigree chart on Family Echo. It helped me understand the relationships between people, especially as I just kept going and going and going and going. Google is not a source that you should completely write off. The genealogical databases are extremely important, but you'd be surprised what you can find by Googling your ancestors. For me, I had been way into my process about 9 months or so, and one day I just randomly decided to Google my grandfather. It's this gentleman right here. And I found that he had recorded an oral history with Duke University in the 90s before he passed in 2000. He died before I was born, and so I had never even heard his voice before, and I couldn't believe that someone had gotten to him, and that was a gift. So Google can turn up with gems as well. And finally, like I mentioned before, the relationship between oral history and conversation and documentation, they're supposed to work hopefully in tandem. Verify the information you find online with people who lived through it. Really quickly, these are the sources that I would highly recommend. They go deeper than I'm able to go in this presentation. Ancestry and Family Search, they are the number one databases in the world at this point. They have millions, if not billions, of records of families around the world, and they also have their own online sources and guides that are free to use. I built my pedigree chart on Family Echo, and it allowed me to plug in information and notes on each and every individual as needed. In terms of books, there are way more books on genealogy than just these two, but I wanted to pull these two because Black Genealogy by Charles Blackson was the first after Roots. And so I consider it an original text for African American genealogy. Then, if you want a more modern take, I pull Generation by Generation by Drew Smith to get a good overview. And finally, Richie's book on oral history is good for professional oral historians to the random person doing a family history project. It'll help you make sure that your recordings are quality and are able to be referenced decades from now. Yet genealogy cannot tell us everything. A fully fleshed out pedigree chart doesn't tell us about the memories, the culture, the migration stories that are sure to turn up. Even so, every single family is unique. When genealogy works for you, it really, really works. But there are certain families and certain dynamics where there are lost documents, or perhaps documents were never created in the first place. Perhaps the relationships in your family are a bit complicated, and you don't have access to the people who do have information on your family history. There are a lot of reasons why genealogy can present obstacles in addition to answers. Also, information that genealogy simply cannot answer. For example, I was 12 about my ancestor born 1828, that told me nothing about her status as a woman born into slavery. I need academic history to flesh out the world around the data that I collected. So that brings us to historical research. This is inspired by the data, exact science. It's driven by your curiosity, purely by your curiosity on your family. You should ask questions such as what subjects and values are significant in your family story? What stories and themes naturally repeat, most particularly throughout your oral history? Just something that all of your grandparents mention. What information will help you better understand your family legacy? And what questions do you have about your family's lives? If after you've completed the bulk genealogical data, if you still think this is where we jump in. This is a spread of one of the essays that I wrote for my family history book. It was surrounded around my ancestors who were born into slavery and were freed after the Civil War. I had the census from 1880. What I wanted to know was before the Civil War for them, and what world would tell me that. Possible property records couldn't exactly tell me that. So I had to ask those questions. What was the significance of New Bern as a slave port? What laws impacted their lives? What did resistance possibly look like for them? So even though I didn't have perhaps a diary where they wrote down their daily experiences, I was able to get a clearer picture by asking these nitty-gritty questions. But not everything has to be an exact academic essay. On the left here, I pulled this subject of Black military history because while I knew that my grandfather served in the Air Force for his entire career, I didn't realize how many other relatives of mine worked or served in the armed forces or the military, going all the way back to World War I. And I'm still trying to verify an ancestor who possibly served in the Civil War as well. I want to just ask the question, what does it mean to be Black and serve in the United States military, particularly with the history of oppression and discrimination here? So that was a meditation, kind of more of an op-ed, but it was very much related to my family tree and our evolution and relationship with the military. Over here on the right, this is a text paired with a document. I wanted to ask and kind of clarify, what does it mean to be documented for the first time immediately after immediately after the Emancipation Proclamation? And also, what are the ways that the census is helpful? What are the ways that it's not? And so this is a blurb kind of exploring the text itself. So there's a range of ways that you can add these educational and informative moments into your family history book that expand the world of your genealogical data. So you have all of your research or a good enough chunk to begin the next step, and now you need to organize it. These are the questions that ask, what is the best way to present your genealogical and historical findings? What is the best way to arrange your family and their stories? So you're not just doing facts and data, but you also get to think about, how do I want to present my family to my family? Every family history book, the primary audience should be your own family members. More often than not, for me, my goal is my number one audience was them. If other people see it and they learn from it, that was great. But they were always in the front of my mind when I was creating this. So, what does it mean to create a text, knowing that your primary audience is also the main characters of that text? What is the best way to honor them in the way that you organize everything? There are multiple different ways I can think of you doing this. You can go by generation by generation. You can have certain years that you want to focus on. You can organize by people and the relationships with each other. You can do a purely maternal section and a purely paternal section. You can go by location. You can go by culture or ethnicity if you're of mixed background. Or maybe there is a very, very niche specific tradition or custom in your family that only makes sense to you that would help you organize everything that you're working with. None of these options are more correct than the other. It is purely in response to the data that you are able to collect. For me, I went with the first option. I wanted to go generation by generation. And for me, the way that I conceptualized this was kind of giving my generations titles that represented the progression in my family. From my maternal family history, as Black Americans who are legacies of enslaved people in the United States, slavery was a big starting point for us. So I wanted to track the generations who were enslaved and the generations who were free afterwards. For my paternal history, it's an immigration story from the Caribbean. So I wanted to mark the immigration generation and the other generations afterwards. That's how I thought of my family history, but there are a number of ways you can do anything else. All right. The next thing you get to do is just write. You have the information to work with, and you get to play with style and form. How do you want to present this information? Family history books do not have one set writing style. You have everything from academic writing to personal essays, letters and poetry, formal language to slang. It's anything that you want it to be. Now, even though these are primarily historical texts, that doesn't mean you have to write the way that we are taught to write for an AP exam. This history is personal, it's not objective. And your perspective as the creator or one of the creators of this project is incredibly important. Almost every single biography that I wrote on my family members, I talked about them from my own lens and perspective, because that's all that I know them as. And so being able to lean into your perspective is one of the ways that you can make your family history book unique. Also, you don't have to be the only person working on this. Ask for contributions from your family members. For me, that meant poetry by my cousin. It meant art by another cousin. I asked for letters. Some also contributed short articles recapping their life story if I wasn't able to interview them. So there's a range of possibilities with how your writing can bring life to all the information that you have, whether it's all purely factual or some is more creative or sentimental. For example, this is a more casual letter on the left. It's full of personal references that between mother and son, they would understand. For me, as her cousin, there are some references that I don't understand, and that's what made this letter so unique. Over here on the right, this is a personal profile or biography on my grandfather, a few paragraphs long, but I start with the way that I understand my grandfather and his legacy as the only grandchild that he never had a chance to meet. So being able to open with a personal experience was one of the ways that I made his biography special to me. If one of my cousins wrote it, it would be read and written differently. Again, for me, it was important to open up the family history book on the first page with an introductory letter from me as the creator. So this is more formal, but it also speaks directly to my audience, saying that this project is for you, whether it's in the present, the past, or the future. And finally, another example. This is a poem that my cousin made. And I knew that I wanted to incorporate her work into the project because she's one of the most artistic people that I know. And so featuring her, um, also being able to show her work in print was an experience that I also wanted to create for us. Okay, this is the fun part, and the part that brought me the most joy after doing a lot of heavy research and a lot of heavy writing, I think, was the design portion. Family history books bring your family to life on the page. You can let their stories and their personalities guide every single design decision. The artistry is just as intentional as the research. What do I mean by that? There are a lot of elements to creating this family history book. The research is one, the writing is another, but the visual should also be able to communicate information on the person, the subject, or the time period as much as the writing. My rule of thumb is if I were to flip through a page right now, let me do it a page, not read a single word, is I should be able to get a sense of this person, even though you can't actually read any of the text. This is my aunt Carolyn, and the way that I designed this page is kind of like a living room, very homey, very warm and cozy, like she is. I will get to the design decision, acted on the information that I was working with for that particular page. It was a person I asked myself what were the accomplishments, perhaps these regular styles, helping me breathe each. It was a particular time or mission. I would ask myself cultural trends or problems that defined that era or place. What are things I can convey visually to put into words? Does the page encapsulate the essence of that person, place, or subject? Does this page need words at all? Can I just let the visuals speak for themselves? And so for this, I had to think about, honestly, longer than I should admit. I had to think about the font. I had to think about what pictures fit here. I had to think about if I wanted to use a template or an array that I found online. The spacing, the colors, and the filters that I use. Remover tools to really isolate specific people or objects. If I wanted to, I knew that I got a page right when I looked at the full spread, and I was like, that is exactly what I'm trying to say. There are multiple ways you can create a family history book. For me, I used Canva. It was a very easy online site to use. You can also use Adobe. A lot of use Adobe to print out zines and design in that way. But if you are a scrapbooker and you love crafting with paper and markers and that sort of thing, you can absolutely make your family history book completely offline as well. So some examples of designs that I'm proud of or that people just really gravitated towards. This is one of the earliest pages. The purpose and function of this page was just to have this QR code to my oral history podcasts. But people loved this page because they could tell the difference in time. And they just loved these portraits of all my family members. It was honestly a page that I didn't think about too hard, but it made one of the biggest impacts, I think, for everyone who saw it, to see all of the faces and to also tell the difference between their eras and their relevant option. These are pages where I did not write a single word myself. On the left here, I feature the front and back of photographs that I found of my mother throughout her K-12 years. I don't need to supplement this page with any of my own commentary or captions. Her writing, her misspelling of the word beautiful just needs to stand alone. Over here on the right, it's a letter that I found from my great-grandfather. Excuse me, my grandfather to my great-grandfather. I also don't need to supplement this. His handwriting speaks for itself, but he tells his father exactly what the subject is. The fact that I have a letter from 1956 at all is the point of the page. And finally, these are pages, my biographies. On the left, my biography about my grandmother, I decided to give it a theme. Something that came up during my father's oral history when he would talk about his mother was her love of music. That outside of being a hardworking single mother, music was her thing. And you mentioned very, very briefly outside of our oral history interview, is just in passing conversation, that it was only when his mother passed that her siblings told him that she was a concert pianist and once performed at Carnegie Hall. And that detail, that tiny, tiny detail, became the entire theme of her biography, that I wanted to honor her and commemorate her as a great musician, um, and nod to that. Over here for my Aunt Renee, she's absolutely fabulous, and I wanted to put her on the page as nothing less. I know that whenever I've gone over to her house in recent years, she either has a movie on or YouTube thrifters on her television. And so I wanted to give her a YouTube page. It pops without having to read a single word I wrote about my Aunt Renee. That's exactly the effect that I wanted. I remember when she saw the page, she was like, "You did a good job." And finally, an example of you can tell about a place. Parents and my aunts, they grew up with Jet magazine, one of the best-selling African American magazines of their era. They would tell me stories their parents would have copy. Well, they threw them all away. So I wanted to just put them on the cover of Jet. Over here, for my grandparents' generation, my father kept my grandmother's typewriter that she used to work all throughout the 50s and 60s. And so, because I physically put a typewriter between these pages, I made a graphic that would define their generation. So, these are all of the ways that you can use visuals to tell what you are writing. Nowhere did I write that I have my grandmother's typewriter. Nowhere did I write that my great grandparents and grandparents read Jet magazine. But through these visuals, I'm able to add even more than what I am writing. And they're also conversation starters. When people read through this text, they're going to ask, why is there a jet cover in the product? Why is your aunt defined by YouTube? Why is your grandmother defined by Carnegie Hall? So this is the way that you continue the tradition of connection. These texts, yes, can be read alone and by yourself in your room, but they can also bring about even more reads. The final step and the best step for me was to print your family history book. I printed, I think at this point, about 20 copies of Baobab, my family history book, and I've distributed them to my family. This very poor angle is of the footage that I took without the first round of my family history book. It was about an hour long of a video, and it was full of people flipping through the pages and going, "Oh, there's mom, me. Oh, I'm gonna read this later." That's the experience of creating your history book. It's not just for you, it's for the entire family, perhaps your entire community. This is the end goal, and this is the purpose of how we can bring our history forward with us. And so now, let me grab the link. I have my family history book available for you all. If you would like to send this code, I'm also going to drop the link in the chat in case you do not have a QR code reader nearby. Let me pull up the chat. We do, everyone. Okay, I just put it in the chat. My apologies. Let me present again. And that's the end of my presentation. The rest of this time is just floor and also any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Ayla, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And I mean, it was absolutely fascinating, your whole process and how beautiful your book came out. So again, thank you. And any questions you can put in the Q&A and we'll try to get to them. I do have a couple of my own, actually. So, what were some of the most moving things you found, and what was the most surprising thing that you found when you were researching?
I would say the most moving, my the most moving was discovering how much was saved, how much my family has saved over the years, that I just thought existed in the first place, and also had never seen. So when I started asking all of these questions, like, oh, do you have anything like in your closet or in your bedroom? The thing that really got me was that my aunt Renee had kept letters that my grandparents her during years. Also letters that my mother sent my aunt Renee during their college years. And so those letters, the first time my grandparents writing, most importantly, they wrote the way that they would have. So it was also my first time kind of hearing their voice from them. It was a primary document, their letters. And that having seen that she had in the first place, and she had maybe about 30 years throughout her college years, was the discovered just the discovery of racial record, more about my back 1989. And so it was my paternal family history that I was kind of beginning a record for, almost starting from scratch a little bit. And so I was very surprised that Ancestry had those immigration ship records, not the census, but they kept track of everyone who entered via ship. And so finding those records actually told me a lot, particularly since the number of relatives I was able to conduct an oral history for were just less than on my mother's side. So that was really surprising and helped me put together a lot of pieces.
Mhm. Great. We do have a couple more questions. Would you or did you use African Ancestry versus Ancestry.com?
For me, I used Ancestry.com the most, particularly because Yale University has a special library accessible version of Ancestry that was free for me to use.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't, so therefore, I was able to be very satisfied with what I could find with Ancestry.com, and I supplemented with oral history and my family's papers as much as possible. Therefore, I'm actually not familiar with African Ancestry, that service and database.
Hmm. And somebody wants to know, what service did you use to print the book?
Yeah, so Canva was the only place where I designed a family history book, and Canva has their own printing service,
Oh,
which is
fantastic. That's
very
good to know.
convenient. Yeah, very convenient for me.
Yeah.
And you can print multiple different sizes on different kinds of paper. And it's pretty high quality. It's I think all of the pages are glossed, so they're kind of stain resistant.
Yep, and I can attest that it's a beautiful book because we here at the museum have been able to see it and read it and look through it. So thank you. And thank you again, Kayla, for sharing your story. And thank you to everyone who logged in today. The recording will be on our YouTube channel in a few days. So if you missed any of it or wanted to go back and rewatch it, to take some notes, and hopefully everyone will start working on their own family histories.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. I hope you have a
Great.
wonderful day.